Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this morning's webinar. The session this morning should take approximately 20 minutes, and there's plenty of time for questions at the end of the session there. If you can remain muted, please, during the session, and any questions you've got, if you can pop those in the chat for me, and then I'll answer the questions at the end. Any questions that we don't get a chance to answer, then they will be added to the frequently asked questions section when the webinar is uploaded onto the webinar webpage. So during today's session, we're going to be looking at our QueueBuster feature. So we're going to be looking at what QueueBuster is. We'll be looking at setting up QueueBuster in Xflow, recognizing QueueBuster calls via the user console, and the QueueBuster report that you can get through the reports console. So what is QueueBuster? QueueBuster is our automated callback system. The parameters can be set by the practice, and that's done through Xflow in the group icon on the desktop area when you're in Xflow. Once it's activated and the parameters are met that you've set, the patient can just press 1 on their telephone keypad when the QueueBuster option is given, and that will then book them an automated callback. That means the patient can then put the phone down and their place is kept in the queue automatically by Surgery Connect. When they reach the front of the queue, the system will automatically call them back as it connects to one of the receptionists. So your receptionists may hear a whisper saying it's a callback from QueueBuster or that we're contacting the caller. And then they'll hear a ringing tone as we call out to that patient. When the patient answers the phone, they'll then be speaking directly through to one of the receptionists. The receptionist can then advise that it's the surgery making the call back and then ask how they can help as normal. So there's no additional work needed from the reception team and nothing extra that needs to be done for anyone on the system. It just means that the patients then won't need to queue in the physical queue, waiting until they're at the next person to be answered there. So you set up QueueBuster in Xflow. You can navigate to Xflow either via the single sign-on window, so when you first log in using the Xflow link on the sign-in page, or you can go via the service delivery console, which will then give you your menus at the top of the page, and you can click onto the numbers option in the service delivery console. You can then select the appropriate call flow from the list that you have on the screen. Alternatively, you can use the menu. So just up next to your initials, you've got your 3 lines. Whenever you click on that in any of the consoles, it will then give you the shortcuts to the other consoles that you have access to. So you can either go directly into Xflow or again via the service delivery console, whichever you prefer. If you go straight into Xflow from the single sign-on, you'll then need to load up the call flow that you want to amend the QueueBuster option on. So to do that, we're just going to click on the load button up on the top left-hand corner of the desktop area. That will then give you a list of the call flows that you have set up, and you can select the relevant call flow from that list. You could also select from the telephone numbers if you'd rather. I'm going to select the main number call flow here, and then we just click on load. That will then load the call flow up. If you've gone through the service delivery console, through the numbers section, the call flow should load automatically when you enter Xflow. So now we have our practice call flow on the screen and in the desktop area of Xflow here. So QueueBuster is managed through the group icons on the desktop. So that's the orange boxes that will then be going through to groups of users to answer those particular calls. We're going to use the appointments group here, as that's the group that tends to be the most prevalent for QueueBuster. If you double click on the relevant group on the desktop, that will open up the properties for you. And then you have your normal 3 tabs, and we're going to use the QueueBuster tab. Within the QueueBuster tab, I can then activate QueueBuster just by changing the mode from off to voluntary. That will then give the patient the option when the threshold is met of dialing 1 on their telephone keypad and booking that callback. You can also change the threshold. Just be aware though that the threshold obviously is the number of patients that will sit in the queue before QueueBuster is offered. You can reduce the threshold all the way down to 4, but be aware that if you take it too low, you may get patients that are booking callbacks, and then as soon as they put the phone down, the phone's ringing with the callback there, and that's not the most efficient use of QueueBuster. So think about how many of your reception team are answering calls at any one time and how quickly they will go through the queue of people waiting to be spoken to before QueueBuster kicks in. So our threshold here is set at 10, which means we'll have 10 patients in the queue. Patient number 11 will then be offered QueueBuster rather than waiting in the physical queue. Because it's on a voluntary basis, it will give them the option of dialing 1, and if they choose not to, they will then stay in the queue listening to the playlist as a normal patient there. You can also click on the advanced settings here, and that will give you further options then, and you can also set text options for the callbacks. So if I click on Show Advanced, it will then expand the screen for me. I can now change the number of attempts that callback makes in order to contact the caller. This can be changed from anything from 1 to 3, and there is also a delay between those attempts, which is default at 30 seconds. So if we don't get through to the patient the first time we try and call them back, it will target another receptionist for the next attempt, and it will then ring the patient again. If we don't get through, it will then try them again. You can also set a reset time to cancel any callbacks. So because our threshold is 10, it's unlikely in our practice that we'll have callbacks in the afternoon. But in the event that we have had 10 people queuing and then callback is activated, those callbacks can be reset before the practice closes. So we've got it set to reset here half an hour before the practice closes. That means then that any outstanding callbacks at 6 o'clock will be automatically cancelled by the system. Now, if the patient's rung in on a mobile phone, you can also activate an SMS so that if the callback is cancelled or if it fails after the attempts that you have set, then it can automatically send out a text to the patient on their mobile number to let them know that you have tried to call them back. And if the patient still needs to speak to you, they will need to ring back into the practice. When they're ringing back in, that telephone number will automatically have priority when it joins the appointments queue again. So it will be added to a priority list and it will push to the front of the queue, so that if we've missed a callback or we've had to cancel a callback, if that patient needs to speak to you, they'll then have a priority call until the end of the day there for you. It's only a priority call for that number when it rings back the first time. So once they've called the practice back, it will then cancel that priority and they would join the QueueBuster queue or the normal queue as normal. The text that's sent out is down at the bottom of the screen here. Obviously, if when you're calling a patient back, you reach a voicemail, that would be classed as the call's being answered. So it wouldn't make any further attempts then to contact that particular caller. So it would be advisable for your staff to leave a message on the voicemail just to let them know that the surgery has tried to call them back. And if they need to speak to you, they'll need to call the practice main number and then they'll be able to come through the queue again. Obviously, that won't prioritise that call because as far as the system's concerned, we reached the voicemail and therefore the callback was done. Once you've changed the settings within the QueueBuster tab in the group, you'll need to save those settings. And remember, any changes are then saved onto the test number first. You can then use auto arrange if necessary. And we can see on our appointments group, now that we've activated QueueBuster, it now says that we have QueueBuster on a voluntary basis on that queue. So it's very clear to see on your graphical representation of your call flow that QueueBuster is now activated and will be on that appointments queue for you. Once you've auto arranged and it's spread it out, because it's on the test number first, we'll then need to deploy the call flow remember to put in a description there of what you've added, so that you've added QueueBuster and which queue you've added to, so that if you load a previous version, you'll know what's going to be taken out there. We're going to now have a look at the user console and how you can recognize a QueueBuster callback. So we've got a user console here, and we can see the numbers obviously that are dialing into the practice and the number that they're dialing into. This appointments group call here is a QueueBuster callback request, and I know that because it's got a little Q in the icon column that will just show us that we've had a QueueBuster request on that call. We could then search for the telephone number, and you would then be able to see the retries that the system has done. So here I've searched for the telephone number that booked the QueueBuster call at 8:03 here. On the QueueBuster system, you will see that the callback looks like it's been done a minute later. So we've got our QueueBuster callback here at 8:04. However, when we look at the duration of that call, we can see there's quite a lot of pre-talk time. Now, pre-talk is normally the time that the patient spends in the queue. The pre-talk time on a QueueBuster callback will show how long it was between the original call and the callback being made. So it's started the callback effectively at 1 minute later after it was booked, and then the pre-talk is 18 minutes because it actually took 18 minutes for us to deal with the rest of the queue until they got to that first position, and then we spoke to the patient on the outbound call. You can also see here a little bit later on, after the callback has been made, the consultation call to that patient that was made then by the GP. On this example, we've had a QueueBuster request here, which has been made on a landline number, and we can see the attempts that have been made then by the system to call that number back later in the day. And we can see that each of those were missed calls. So it will show on the system, you can see the attempts there and the missed calls on the attempts. Within the reports console, there is a specific QueueBuster report. So if you go to the reports console again, either via the single sign-on or through the menu on the side, so you can go back to your single sign-on window and click on reports, or you can go through the menu next to your initials and then select reports from the shortcuts there. In the group reports, there is a QueueBusting report. You can run that for the particular group that has QueueBuster set up on it. And I've done this report by hour so that I can see for each hour in the day how many QueueBuster calls the system was handling. I've then selected a single day, so it will just show me that particular days. But again, you can change that to a weekly report if you'd rather, or any period in the custom settings there. When you generate the report, it will then bring the report up on the screen. I've then used the sort options at the top of the first column to bring up when the QueueBuster activates. And as we can see, QueueBuster, as we expect, is activating first thing in the morning and then carrying on in our practice up until around 1 o'clock. So you can see the number of calls that were queuing when QueueBuster was active, and also the number of calls that were made that were requested as a QueueBuster call. We can see the callbacks that were made and the attempts, and whether patients didn't answer and didn't make that call back. There's also some times at the end here, so that will show you the time that all of those patients spent in the virtual queue. So that's waiting for their callbacks through QueueBuster, which will be your pre-talk time that you'll see on the duration on the user console. It then splits it down to an average time for those patients. So QueueBuster, on average, is saving these patients 18, nearly 19 minutes in waiting time. So that's 20 minutes where they haven't had to be on the phone waiting for the receptionist to answer the other calls. It will show you that for each hour on my report, because that's the way that I've requested the report there. So we've had a look at our QueueBuster feature, and that's our automated callback system. We've looked at setting up QueueBuster in Xflow, and we've looked at recognizing QueueBuster calls on the user console. We've also looked at the QueueBuster report via the reports console.